Hi everyone, my name is Caleb Lareau, and today I'm going to talk about my insecurities. So in order to do this, I first want to talk a little bit about the two ways that I self-identify, these being my aspiration to one day become a medical researcher, and the other, my current participation in extreme endurance athletics. For the past couple of years, people have often asked me, what motivates you to pursue these activities? And my generic, socially acceptable answers have usually been, I'm passionate about running, or I'm curious about the genetics of human disease. But today, I want to make the very public confession that the real reason why I set and pursue extreme goals, both academically and physically, is that I act out of fear. I want to explain why so often I spend my Thursday nights writing computer code instead of socializing, or why I wake up at 5 a.m. nearly every morning to train my body instead of sleeping in. It's not necessarily passion or curiosity that drives me. It's fear. I act because I'm legitimately terrified. Because I'm not secure with who I am as a person, I have resolved to push myself to become better. Oftentimes, our insecurities severely cripple us or inhibit us. I want you to imagine the third grader who struggles in math, so he avoids the subject to save himself some grief. Or I want you to imagine the overweight woman who's not secure about her body image, so she refuses to go to the gym. Or I want you to imagine the father who is scared to acknowledge his own daughter because he knows that he hasn't been able to deliver on his promise to stop smoking. While these are all depictions of individuals who are actively inhibited by their insecurities, I believe that I have found a way to acknowledge my fears, to embrace my insecurities, and to utilize them as motivation to propel myself to become better. For my first story, I want to take you back just 16 months ago, when I couldn't have even fathomed running a 5K. I lived this really comfortable, sedentary lifestyle, due in large part to a 5-year-old relationship with this girl, Kelsey, that I just assumed I would marry. I was content being me, kind of chubby, generally unathletic, because I had found complete validation from this girl. But in January of 2014, we agreed to separate, and I experienced a virtual panic attack that I now refer to as my quarter-life crisis. You see, I'm extremely insecure about my perception of attractiveness to women. And so when I came to grips with the fact that I was no longer going to be with Kelsey, I became scared, and the panic began to set in. So on January 20th, 2014, I set out to run just 1 mile because I realized that in my current state, I probably wasn't attractive enough to draw another mate of her caliber. So I said, I gotta be better. So I set out to run this mile, and within 4 minutes, I was painfully out of breath. I couldn't even run a mile. And as I'm sitting there, hunched over, panting, I could feel the panic begin to set in. For just a second, I began to want to self-identify as someone who would just become oblivious to the perceptions of women, whereas it would secretly be eating me up from the inside. And so in my moment of terror and pain and being scared, I remembered a quote, and I want to share that with you today. And the quote reads that someone once told me the definition of hell. The last day that you have on earth, the person that you became will meet the person that you could have become. So again, in this moment of mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion, I suddenly saw a binary outcome for my life. Either I could become the person who let his insecurity with women define him, or I wouldn't. Either I could spend eternity in hell witnessing the happy, fulfilled life that I could have had, or I could go out and I could take that life for myself. So with these two outcomes presented in front of me, when a tangible fork in the road was placed in front of me, I made the only decision that I really could make. I picked one foot back up and I placed it in front of the other. Within 40 days, I ran my first half marathon. Within 74, my first full marathon. And within 88 days, I finished second in my age group in my first ever triathlon. My honest and sincere motivating factor whenever I attempted a race, and this is true even to some extent today, whether it's a 140-mile triathlon or a 32-hour ultramarathon, was not just to finish the race or to set a new personal best, but it was to take one more step in becoming more attractive to women, thereby attacking my insecurity. But as I started to reach these physical milestones, I realized that I was embracing a more fundamental principle to address this insecurity, and that I was pushing myself to become the best Caleb that I can be. While I believe at a certain level that I can accomplish anything that I set my mind to achieving, I often feel inadequate when I fall short of my goals, and I feel inferior against the accomplishments of other men. So again, I can either let this insecurity define and disable me, or I can acknowledge it and embrace it and use it as motivation to make myself better. And this is how I've used my insecurity about women finding me attractive to push myself as an endurance athlete. So, while combating this insecurity has certainly changed my life, I self-identify as a scientist first and as an athlete second. So perhaps unsurprisingly, my motivation as a scientist is driven by an even more fundamental insecurity than my perceived attractiveness to women. And this is my fear of being forgotten or being irrelevant. It's hard imagining that one day no one on earth is going to remember my name. No one on earth is going to remember that I did anything. I think that the philosopher and artist Banksy put it best when he said it this way. Banksy said that they say you die twice. One time when you stop breathing, and a second time, a bit later on, when somebody says your name for the last time. So, as a scientist, it's extremely humbling to realize that one day, no one will remember that I existed or that I did anything to help the problems that face the world today. I mean, humbling is not exactly the word that I would use. It's scary, it's annoying, it's depressing. But again, I have this option. Either I can let my insecurity of being forgotten justify inactivity. I can lay there curled up in my bed, meditating on the fact that no one's going to remember me anyways. Why bother do anything? Instead of doing that, I have resolved to rectify as much pain for as many people as possible. For me, this looks like using my skills as a genetic researcher to solve as many disease systems as possible. So utilizing these skills that I've cultivated, I'm going to go to Harvard next year to sit with people far more intelligent than me, to push me to become better. So again, using this insecurity of being forgotten, using this insecurity of not mattering, instead of using it as justification to be inactive, I'm utilizing it to push my work as a scientist. So I want to go back to those 3 stories that I told earlier, right? Remember that 3rd grader who struggles in math? Imagine with me for a moment, he gets an F on his test. And he says, okay, enough's enough. I'm going to study harder. Or I want you to imagine this overweight woman walking down the street and she gets made fun of. And she starts crying and she says, okay, I've had enough. I'm going to the gym every single day next week. Or I want you to imagine a tearful exchange between a father and his daughter where he says, honey, I promise this time's going to be different. Enough is enough. I'm going to break this addiction. Sadly, most of these scenarios that we've heard of like this often end with that person burning out and being unable to implement the long-term change that they need to succeed. So now that I've pulled the curtain back and exposed my own insecurities, I want to share with you the method by which I've been able to acknowledge my fears, to embrace my own insecurities, and to utilize them as motivation instead of inhibition in my own life. So to do this, I want to tell one last personal story. Last November in Tulsa, I signed up to run a marathon. And I've done several marathons and harder races other than marathons, so there shouldn't have been any problem. The difference, though, was the day before, I was in Houston interviewing for the Rhodes Scholarship, arguably one of the single most prestigious awards in the entire world. So after months of meticulously drafting a personal statement, after sitting through dozens of humbling faculty interviews here at Tulsa, they told me, you have to do this better, you have to be better, you have to, everything about you has to be better. And then finally, going to that interview process, putting my best foot forward, and them telling me that I wasn't selected. That sucked. You see, being told that I wasn't good enough by this committee that I admired and I respected above all others, that hit the core insecurity that I have more so than any other one. And that's my craving for validation. You see, my desire to be found attractive by women is just a manifestation of my desire to be validated by them. Similarly, my desire to not be forgotten by humanity or by the scientific community is, again, a manifestation of my desire to be validated. And so again, being told that I wasn't good enough, being not validated by this committee, it hurt. It hurt a lot. They hit me right where my biggest insecurity is. So again, the next day, I set out to run this marathon like I had planned. And I was so pissed off. For the first 15 miles, I ran like I had never run before. And even to this day, the first 15 miles of that race remain my single best performance in an endurance competition to date. The problem, of course, is that a marathon isn't 15 miles. It's 26.2. You see, I was driven in that first 15 miles by this extrinsic stimulus, this emotional reaction to being told that I wasn't good enough, this attack on my insecurities. And I ran with an attitude and a motivation that screamed, I'm better than this, you made a mistake, I'm going to prove you wrong. But that couldn't sustain me, and I burnt out, and my emotions failed me. My slowest ever marathon time was that Sunday in Tulsa, even after a fantastic first 15 miles. I tell you the story to give a very graphic example about the way that most people go about combating their insecurities is using a highly emotional, extrinsic stimulus to attack them. But this is going about it the wrong way. And so now I want to tell you the right way, right? So it's just the opposite. Instead of using extrinsic stimulus, instead of using emotion, what we as humans need to do is rely on intrinsic motivation, pushing ourselves, self-sustainment, a rational acknowledgement of our fears. So how do we do this? Well, so the next time you make a resolution to become better, the next time you look at a number on a scale and you're like, that's too big, I got to do something about this. Instead of letting that emotion drive you and then it burning out and you reverting back to your old habits, I want you to try something. I want you to spend 15 minutes in a quiet room all by yourself, meditating on the person that you want to become. I want you to picture a better version of yourself, free from whatever insecurity it is that's holding you back. And then with a real pencil and paper, I want you to write down what this image of yourself looks like and the steps that you know you need to take to achieve that better version of yourself. Here's mine. And so the point of this is that whenever your emotions fade, whenever you start to burn out, whenever the extrinsic stimulus is no longer there to keep pushing you, you need to train your rational subconscious to acknowledge, why am I insecure about this? Why am I afraid of this? Why am I trying to combat this? And so what you do with this piece of paper is you put it somewhere where you can see it every day. And don't just glance at it in passing. I want you to look at it. I want you to look deeply into it. I want you to remember the motivation by which you wrote what you wrote on that piece of paper. And I want you to breathe. And I want you to remember and to push yourself to become that better you. You see, we as humans, the single thing that distinguishes us from all other species out there on the planet is that humans have an uncanny ability to take a wealth of information, process it, and make meaningful decisions. And I implore you to use this to your advantage. While your emotions and the extrinsic stimulus that you feel in the world will eventually fail you, your mind will not. In fact, the fact that you are sitting here in the room today means that you were evolutionarily selected such that your mind will not fail you. Again, I implore you to use this to your advantage. Stop letting your insecurities define you. Stop letting them inhibit you, and start letting them work for you. Combating your insecurities never gets any easier, but you do become better. Thank you.